in French you say qu'on présente plus, who doesn't need any presentation. I don't know how to present you. Hacker, digital, human rights advocate. In preparation for this interview, I was just watching again your historic now conversation with Julian Assange from some years ago, which was in his cypherpunks series. And I just thought, you know, I wanted to start this by asking, are you still a cypherpunk? And perhaps more than ever, what are you doing at the moment?
Oh, well, I'm doing a couple of things. Actually, I'm building up a small company to provide not only integrated services, but also to set up a collection of services which can be applied decentralized. So the idea is to have open source components put together and maybe made slightly better than they are right now in respect to the usability, to allow alternatives to the big US companies currently dominating the internet. So the idea is that small internet service providers in small cities all over the planet can, without any high cost, because the software basically is free, but there's of course some work and some investment to be made into hardware, into the understanding and administration capability. So to set up small services, to have your own mail provider, to have your own social network stuff and so on, locally keeping the data in place and not becoming a digital colony of the US.
Becoming a digital colony of the US. So clearly you feel that decentralization is really a key part of the present strategy.
Absolutely, it kind of has always been. I mean, what we're currently seeing is quite a nightmarish depowering, not only of governments, which as an anarchist, you know, you could say, well, I mean, why should I be sad if governments get depowered? The reason why you should be sad is because that one government, even if it's in a state of insanity, gets actually more power and gets more access to data. So at the end of the day, maybe a better strategy than to fight governments is to increase the amount of governments and to increase the amount of decentral power instead of destroying existing structures and leaving it then up to the California crowd to suck up the rest of the revenue chain.
So in fact you're saying that when you say digital colony of the US, you're not referring so much to the US government as to the ones who, or perhaps you are, I don't know.
No. This is more referring to companies, we could talk now about Uber or Airbnb or whatever, who actually take what's called this disruptive way of analyzing an economic model and kind of ignoring the value of the existing structure and just rebuilding it to simplify it, maybe to kill intermediates or to allow it to be used more easily, whatever. But if you look at Airbnb and their impact on the housing market, of the affordability of apartments in urban cities in Europe, this is quite a disaster. But it's not that the money is not there, the money is just somewhere else. So the revenue is now being made somewhere in California, and that's what you could call it colonialism. And actually the Chinese governments were the only one who had a long-term strategic analytical way of understanding what the internet might do, and they have prevented this. So this is not about censorship, this is about protecting their own country. And if you go to China today, you don't have one Uber, you have tens of it, because you have lots of local economic players who provide the same things in different ways. And they have their own search engine, Baidu, they have their own social network, there's WeChat, they have payment functions in it. They allow people to become pretty easily a merchant and not only become a consumer. So there's, I have to say that's quite something what they did. But in the rest of the planet, we have quite a dominance of some US companies taking not only the data, but also identifying the amount of money to be made by providing services.
So you think that this is one of the big issues in terms of the whole big data situation?
Yes, that's part of the big issue, yes.
And what about, I mean, we've had this big debate now about artificial intelligence, about where this might be heading, where it might not be heading. What do you feel are the major questions that really need to be addressed at the moment?
Well, let's break the question down a little, because artificial intelligence is quite an abstract term that many people might not be able to get a clear picture of what that is. So what we currently have is systems that collect a vast amount of data, be it Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. And also there is this big data gets analyzed by people who can make economic decisions based on it. So your insurance company will be interested if you have friends maybe posing on Facebook with taking drugs or whatever. Your bank will be interested if your social network shows people who have debts or have problems paying their credits off or whatever. So there's quite some direct like economic usage of that type of data, but there's also lots of indirect. So if you look at how now we have that it has happened that we have a president of the United States of America who is actually come to the point saying that, you know, global warming is a conspiracy theory of the Chinese government in order to gain economic advantage over the US. So, and that type of conspiratorial thinking, I mean, you might think that's nuts. No, that is quite a strategy that was embedded into social networks and was based on big data to know and to predict how people would react on specific information and to nudge them into a specific way of thinking. So nudging is the art of making someone make something without ordering it to him, but like suggesting it to him with some kind of incentivizing information in it. And so there's quite some psychological aspects here when you know a lot of things about how people usually react to things. If you have their history of watching pictures, liking or disliking things, then you can predict how they will react, and you can bring them things that they will likely agree to, and you can bring them into a specific pattern that you might want.
So in other words, you're talking about manipulation possibilities and
the
emergence of a sort of soft, and dictated is perhaps a strong word to use, but that's what it brings the conditions of possibility for that, let's put it this way.
Yes, I mean, the thing is that I think my biggest worry in the so-called social networks, I actually usually call them asocial networks, as these are technical systems that make you believe you are among friends and make you believe that it is to your advantage to disclose information about your mood, about your way of thinking, about all kinds of things that you do or don't do. And this simulation is made up to gain all that data from you and to economize that data. So in most of these systems, you are actually not the customer, you are the product. So you are being sold your attention and your data is being sold to others. But the biggest worry I do have is that also there's this moods, there's this mobs actually. So it is you and your group and your friends have a specific way of thinking about something, so you are likely also to fall into a similar pattern, because otherwise you would have to overcome to inconvenience, to disagree with your friends. So there's quite some aspects here that you could well call digital fascism 3.0 or something, because we're not so far away that sometimes these moods are also being used by now, what they call it fake news or whatever, but the news aspect is not the important thing. The important thing is how this works for people in a group, agreeing, disagreeing, how you can simplify complexity for people who are maybe not used to a high level of complexity in processing reality. So, I mean, and the Nazis in Germany did just the same. It was simple answers to complex questions that you could agree to, and then you'd be free of decision making, then you'd have a lot of friends. So this was a very convenient way to nudge people into doing real evil.
Yes, I mean, this question, sorry to interrupt you, the question of freedom from decision making is one that's recurred throughout this whole weekend.
Yeah.
Is that this seems to be a theme which is coming back and back again, that there is a real danger in a whole number of fields of disengagement in terms of actual responsible decision making. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yes, I mean there's kind of different aspects of that. There is de facto depowering. Look, if you are, let's say you're a national government of a small country somewhere in Europe or Latin America or Africa, whatever, and now you want to start a process to rethink some of the policies of your countries, or you want to engage in some kind of a political debate or a movement or whatever. Now you have the problem that your population, while it physically still lives in your country, the reality and the minds of the most of the young people are actually created through their mobile phones, maybe, in the reality of the so-called social networks. So actually this is quite a dramatic thing in respect to constructivism. So the question of who constructs your reality, and if people, because it is more funny to think that global warming is a Chinese conspiracy theory, and that's why they agree to, because it's just more fun than to think, oh shit, we have a problem out there, and that problem might kill us if we don't change our behavior. You know, that's convenience and fun versus inconvenience. So you can kind of predict where people tend to go. And here is, yeah, we're running into real issues as the zombies, you can call these people, you know, people who tend to live in the reality of the mobile phones the whole day. They might be slightly out of touch with the physical and scientific things that actually affect their real reality, because their belief system is somewhere else.
So you're suggesting, in fact, that certain world leaders have really been elected because people found them more entertaining?
Yes, that's part of it. And it's also part of it that some governments have less and less influence on their citizens, as they can still maybe make some laws and this and that, but they maybe don't touch the reality that the citizens of the country really live in.
Do you think that this is getting worse? Or
absolutely, absolutely.
So
I think this is.
You don't feel that there's much sort of coherent analysis going on at the moment?
Well, there is. No, there's quite some people who analyze this. But there is, on the other hand side, I mean, if you look at the realities created, if we would have the same discussion, let's say 20 years ago, we would mainly talk maybe about television, and then we would talk about the impact of violence shown on TV compared to, you know, other things and so on. And I mean, it is fair to say that people and culture, a culture of the human race, has been analyzing the actings of others and copying that behavior. That's not a crime. That's just a scientific. Yeah, that's very basic cultural theory. And if you are used to see that violence and shooting someone or whatever is just a normal thing to do, then maybe you just do that. And if you look at the US, we might see, well, okay, there's maybe even scientific evidence that that is exactly what's happening. Now that was 20 years ago, and now we are in a different world where it's no more TV, because TV had, let's say, limited amount of realities. Now we have very personal realities. And the gaps between the personal individual realities are just bridged by sometimes maybe just belonging to a group, and sometimes maybe they are indeed personal realities, because just that you saw something on Facebook and liked it and perceived it as the news that made your day, it doesn't mean that your neighbor got the same piece of information. So you can, and now if you look at the ways to, if you look at the history of ways for governments, for companies, to use that type of ability to either distract you or to, you know, counter some kind of a political movement, the so-called counterinsurgency measures, or if you look at ways to promote products or promote services, or to, you know, promote a political campaign. I mean, there's quite some abusive options growing by the minute here.
And one thing which we haven't discussed, but which I would love to just get your opinion on, is the whole question of humans being connected objects through our RFID technology, and the possibilities that this also opens for manipulation.
Well, I mean, RFID is just one aspect of humans become objects. Actually, we are surrounded by a lot of technology that is measuring and that is filming and that is doing all kinds of things. And I mean, I've been recently the last one that I have quite often to Shenzhen. That's a Chinese city where the electronic more or less grows on the streets. And you have their shopping malls, which you would, if you go here in Switzerland to a shopping mall, you see clothes and shoes and these kind of things there. You see, you know, chips and LEDs and cameras and all that kind of thing. So the Chinese have a bit of an issue there. They can produce anything, but there's hardly anything the human race needs. So there comes all this funny inventions where we think, do we really need it? Is it really my fridge that needs me to tell me the milk is empty? Or is it maybe still my ability to realize there's no more milk or whatever? I mean, all this kind of things that are then promoted as Internet of Things. And I mean, the technology then used to transmit data between these devices and you, there's RFID, but there's lots of others as well. So I'm not really afraid of this, as I see that at the end of the day, this is just decent Chinese people who want to feed their children, and they just want to sell, you know, whatever it is. But then there is, like the abusive patterns that come into the game are more coming from people who generate business cases that actually make you think you just brought a machine that cleans your apartment, like this vacuum cleaner robot. And now they identify the issue because the technology has its price. So why can't we make the vacuum cleaner cheaper by selling the data that this little robot measures? Because he knows the measurements of your apartments, because he needs to be able to find a way back to the charger. And I can assure you, for just 2 cents more, he'll have a camera, and for 3 cents more, he will have a sensor to analyze the dust in your apartment and transmit that data and sell it to your health insurance company, identifying that your cat maybe has a disease, or that you are, you know, having a cigarette stuff on the carpet or anything else. So there's all kind of things, and then the question becomes really of ownership, because you think this is your machine, but that's not the point. You maybe own that piece of metal, but the thing that controls it, the software, the algorithms, the data that's being gathered, that's owned by someone else. And you are not what we call the process owner. And that has to change. So people today are already subject to decisions by algorithms that they don't understand, and they are not even informed that it was that way, and that has to change. So we need more transparency, and we need ways for people to really understand not only the data being gathered about them, but the algorithms and the mechanics of the decisions being made.
So of course with algorithms we're back to a number, and I think that the classic line of the cult series The Prisoner back in the 1960s is as relevant as always. I'm not a number, I'm a free man.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you know, when you really go that path and look at George Orwell's thing, and I mean, everybody's equal, no, I'm more equal. And I mean, if you today meet any NGO on the planet and it has the name freedom in it, you can be almost sure it's CIA funded. That's kind of a joke of the NGO community, because the way of the US to bring their infrastructure into other countries and to overthrow governments and to change belief systems is by selling freedom. And to declare you that your previous government or the guy that want to change or whatever, you know, is limiting your choice and all that kind of things. So what does freedom mean? Freedom means, first of all, the freedom of the US to bring into the game the Googles, the Facebooks and so on, and to actually, yeah, make your country a digital colony. And I mean, and there's, I mean, okay, this is of course a very rough statement I'm making here, and this needs to be fairly analyzed into lots of detail, so I apologize for being a little rough here. But it's, I think people have to be very critical if they are becoming anything so to improve their freedom, what it really means. Because at the end of the day, very often it's just the freedom of someone else to steal your money or take the revenue from the processes that you previously used in a different way. So.
Well, I think that I would sum up this discussion by saying you have a brain, use it or lose it.
Yeah, well, but look, the thing is that, I mean, I could say I'm kind of in a privileged position, as I know people who make technology. I have the ability to talk with them. I also, I don't respect technology. I know what that technology is just meant by humans and so on. But there's quite some people who have difficulties here, and I think we do need to think about how the technology is getting to an advantage, because we might here in the Western world talk about robots as, you know, these little elements that will help us to go further on. If you're in Afghanistan, robots are the flying drones that kill you automatically if you switch on your mobile phone and you tend to have the SIM card with the wrong number. So this is no fun. This is some serious issues out there.
And MULLER-MAGUHN, this could go on for a long time.
Yeah.
So thank you very
It
much.
will, unfortunately.